Well, I wasn't going to do a series, actually. I thought I'd just do one video, how I became a Muslim, and then that's turned into how I became a Muslim part 2. And guess what? This is how I became a Muslim part 3. And maybe, who knows, maybe there'll be more. But what I'm doing here is I'm actually just going back over some very significant, heavyweight Christian scholarly works about the historical Jesus, about Islam, and just to share with you some remarkable disclosures, the things that I've read, because I really want you to know about this stuff. And very few people do, actually, because it's really tucked away in dusty books. And the book I want to share with you today, no more Jimmy Dunn, although I could go on quite a long time about other things he said, maybe in a future video. But today, I want to share with you a remarkable work. It's this one, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, student edition, edited by the late and great Raymond Brown, who I heard lecture once at Oxford. He sadly passed away. Now, this particular volume I bought when I was a theology student at London University studying the New Testament, amongst other things. And this was recommended to me as the best single one-volume commentary on the whole Bible. Now, this isn't just any old book. Oh, no, this is a very special book. Why? Because it is an official publication of the Roman Catholic Church itself. And we know this because just inside the cover, for those who know about these things, you'll know what I mean. It says the nil obstat and the imprimatur of this book are official declarations that a book or pamphlet is free of doctrinal or moral error. This is an official statement by the Catholic Church itself that this particular book is an official publication and it's free from moral or doctrinal error. It doesn't mean they agree with all the contents, but it's not going to lead you astray. Now, why does this matter? Well, this volume tells us some very interesting things about the historical Jesus and Islam. And it's mind-blowing. It really is. I'm not exaggerating here. Well, I'll read it to you and you can see for yourself. Now, I'm going to read from a passage in this book, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, that focuses on Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, where Jesus teaches about the law and the prophets. The law is the Jewish law, of course, found in the Torah, the 613 commandments, apparently given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. I say apparently because that's what our Torah says, but we don't know if it's been preserved completely or not. But at least the Bible today says all these particular verses were given, or commandments were given to Moses. And Jesus teaches about these commandments. And then I just want to read this very brief passage in the Bible to you, and then share with you what the New Jerome Biblical Commentary says about this and about Islam, because it is extraordinary. And then there's a twist at the end to this story. I have to wait to the end of the video. And there's a strange twist to this story, which only occurred to me a few minutes ago while I was preparing for this, but it's quite a curious ending to it. So what's the fuss about? So back to the Bible, my Holy Bible, my well-thumbed New Revised Standard Version. Many think it's the gold standard in academic translations of the Bible, the New Revised Standard Version. And in their translation of Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 onwards, Jesus is presented as saying the following about the Jewish law, the commandments in the Torah. He says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." End quote. Matthew 5, 17 through to verse 20. This is a very perplexing set of verses if you're a Christian. And I said, I got this book, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, when I was a Christian at university studying the Bible. And this particular passage was troubling. Maybe you can guess why. Well, let's see what the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, this official publication of the Catholic Church, says, approved of by the Church. It's got that official stamp on it saying it's free of doctrinal and moral error. So, wow, that's quite significant. So what does this text say? So I'm looking at page 641. You can still get copies of this online, maybe even a PDF. If you can, do look it up. I'll just read to you what it says. So it's commenting on the passage I've just read. These verses give the basic legal principles of the sermon. This is the Sermon on the Mount. So this passage, it was in the Sermon on the Mount. They are also the most controversial passages or verses in Matthew, and there is no consensus on their interpretation. The interpreter must try to state the problem clearly and to provide a historically honest judgment, even at the price of theological tidiness. What do you mean by theological tidiness? I think they mean even at the price of there being contradictions in the Bible. This is what they're hinting at. They're hinting at problems, discrepancies, contradictions down the line in this passage. Other bits of the Bible may disagree with what Matthew has Jesus say. The problem, it says, arises because the plain sense of the words is that Jesus affirms the abiding validity of the Torah. But this contradicts Paul. This is the lack of tidiness they're referring to. This contradicts Paul, and they say, look at Galatians, the letter of Galatians 2:15-16, and Romans chapter 3, verse 21 to 31. You can look this passage up yourself, where what Paul teaches about the law, very different from what Jesus teaches in the law, according to Galatians and Romans. Moreover, the passage says, no major Christian church requires observance of all 613 commandments of the Old Testament law, ethical and ceremonial, but only the ethical commandments, such as the Decalogue. Decalogue's a fancy word for the 10 Commandments, and the commandments to love God and neighbor. So that's all most Christians are concerned about, just the 10 Commandments. Actually, they don't obey 10, they obey 9, because one of them says obey the Sabbath. And I don't know any Christians who obey the Sabbath, because that's not a Sunday. They tend to follow the view that Sunday is the Christian day of rest and the day that people go to church. Anyway, thus, the passage says, there is a gap between the teaching here in Matthew and the teaching and practice of the churches. Wow. They recognize there's a gap between what Jesus taught and what Christians practice today. There's a pretty big gap, and it gets worse. The position adopted here is the following. A, there are contradictions within the New Testament on penultimate matters. Penultimate means secondary, second to last. This is not necessarily a disadvantage, they say, since it should widen Christian tolerance of variety within the church and help ecumenism. This is making a virtue out of necessity here. Well, okay, there are contradictions in the Bible, there are different views, but hey, that's a good thing. We live in a plural, diverse society. We can make a virtue out of this problem. Okay. And then they give a bunch of references. Now, it then goes on later in the paragraph. It says, there are two common exegetical strategies for evading the plain meaning. So there are two ways that Christians commonly adopt to avoid the plain meaning of the text. And it looks at both of these options. The first one, A, reinterpretation, especially through verse 18. But then it says, compare 23:23. Okay, this is a technical point. If you look at Matthew 23:23, in the latter part of Matthew, Jesus upholds the law again in that passage as well. Anyway, so that clearly is not a workable solution to avoid a plain meaning. So what's the other solution? Because these are two possible solutions or ways to avoid the plain meaning of what Jesus says. The first one clearly doesn't work. The second one, which they prefer, is this: denial of authenticity. This latter approach contains much truth, they say. Okay, so their way of dealing with this awkward passage where Jesus upholds the Jewish law is to deny that he taught that that he upheld the law. So simply say, nah, it's fake, it's false. Okay, interesting. Apart from verse 18, the verse 18, which I'll just repeat here, says, For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. That's verse 18. Apart from that verse, the verses are probably post-Paschal and reflect the outlook of Jewish Christianity. Post-Paschal means after the death and resurrection. So basically they're saying that these verses were created in the early church, much, much later, by Matthew perhaps, or people he knew, or people he inherited his traditions from, but they came from later, not from the historical Jesus. So that's their preference. These are made up, they think. These verses are probably created later and reflect the outlook of Jewish Christianity, which, as a separate movement, was eventually defeated by Paulinism. This is Paul's teaching, and died out, perhaps to be reborn in a different form as Islam. Whoa, that's the shocker. That's the shocker. Jewish Christianity, which ultimately died out, defeated, they say, by Pauline Christianity, the religion of the Apostle Paul, his understanding of Christianity, because he never met Jesus. Okay. What's remarkable is that original Jewish Christian faith was reborn as Islam, according to the official teaching of the New Jerome Biblical Commentary, this Catholic publication. Isn't that remarkable? And then immediately they say, see H.J. Shoep's in his work, Jewish Christianity. So they're referring to another academic work for further reading. And it just so happens, I have a quote by this guy, who's a German academic, specialist in this subject. And there's a quote from him in this marvelous book, The Islamic Jesus by Mustafa Akyol, which I do recommend. Anyway, this work quotes this guy, Shoep's, and he says this: here is a paradox of world historical proportions. Jewish Christianity indeed disappeared within the Christian church, but was preserved in Islam. Boom. Wow. This is the paradox. So this is the huge irony of history, that the later Christian church, which claims Jesus as its own, proclaiming what they think is the truth about Jesus, is in fact not the original Jewish Christianity, represented by people like James and Peter and John and so on, people who knew Jesus. But Islam most closely represents, or was preserved, actually he says, Jewish Christianity disappeared, but was within the church, but was preserved in the religion of Islam. Islam itself preserves the original teaching of the Jesus disciples, of Jesus and the earliest church. Isn't that interesting? And that quote comes from the very person that the Catholic Church itself in this book recommends we read for further understanding. See H.J. Shoep's in his work, Jewish Christianity. Isn't that interesting? So that's the kind of news. I think there's enough here for the moment. A few further reflections might suggest that Jesus, and this is a very common view, by the way, amongst scholars, Christian scholars, that Jesus was a Torah observant Jew. So like Muslims who followed the Sharia, the divine law contained in the Quran and the Sunnah, Jews, traditional Orthodox Jews, and Jesus was one of those, upheld and practiced the divine law, the halakha. And we find those laws in the Torah, which the Quran says was given to Moses by God. But later Christians who never met Jesus, Paul obviously, but many others, like Ignatius of Antioch towards the end of the 1st century, who said that we do not follow Judaism. Do not follow Judaism. He was a bishop of Antioch who was martyred early in the 2nd century. We have his letters today, Saint Ignatius of Antioch. And he says in his letters, and I've quoted this before, don't follow Judaism. We are Christians, follow Christianity. And with Ignatius, at the end of the 1st century, we have the first ever recorded occurrence of the word Christianity as such. This idea of a separate religion from Judaism. So with Ignatius, of course, wasn't Jewish. At the end of the 1st century, we have a different religion. And yet he is an acknowledged father and bishop that all the mainline churches, Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox, recognizes a great early Christian leader and bishop and theologian. And yet he rejected the very religion that Matthew's gospel says that Jesus upheld. Do not think I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. No, 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 I've not. So this is the irony of world historical proportions that German theologian referred to. And I think he has a point. So here we have, as I say, the New Jerome Biblical Commentary in its words on Matthew's Gospel and the Sermon on the Mount, recognizing explicitly that the Jewish Christian outlook reflected in Matthew's Gospel, which was the earliest, died out or defeated by the Paul's Christians, but was reborn as Islam. Isn't that interesting? And they know this, They're stating it. Now, I said to you at the beginning, there's a twist to this tale. And yes, there is. Because this old tome, as I said, I had it as a university student. God, it's a huge, massive thing. Very, very heavy. Anyway, there's a new edition of this. Here we go. The New Jerome Biblical Commentary for the 21st century, fully revised edition. And guess what? There's a foreword by, notice the figure, by Pope Francis himself. And he writes a big chapter of this right at the beginning, praising this fully revised edition. Now, what's the catch? Well, if you go to exactly the same place, the commentary on Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, there is no reference to Islam. It has been removed. They've taken it out. No longer will you read how the earliest form of Christianity was reborn as Islam. That's been deleted from the revised edition. Isn't that interesting? But the words about, Matthew's understanding of the law, Jesus' understanding of the law in Matthew, upholding the law is still there. They reworded it, but it's basically there. But any reference to Islam, any reference to that German theologian who spoke about the great irony of world historical proportions have been deleted, removed. I'm not saying Pope Francis has done this, by the way. I'm just saying the editors. One of the editors, John J. Collins, I've had the honor to interview on this channel on blogging theology, actually. He's an expert on the Old Testament. He's a Harvard professor, a very distinguished scholar. And I'm not saying he's done that either, by the way. There are 4 editors of this volume. So this is the latest edition. Let's see. It has the nil obstat again. It must do. Yep, it still has it. And yeah, the imprimatur. There are declarations that material is free from doctrinal or moral error. But any reference to Islam being the natural successor or continuation of the original faith of Jesus has been removed. But it's still in this edition, so it's not been lost, folks, and you can get it for yourself. You can actually read this online. I think there's a PDF available. So yep, I just wanted to share that amazing news. The Catholic Church, at least the authors of this text and the hierarchy, realize that Islam is the Jewish Christian faith reborn. They know this, but they still choose to worship a different kind of religion that finds its origins with the Apostle Paul and others like him in the 1st century. That's their decision, of course. Anyway, that's it for now. Please leave your comments in the description below. Till next time.